Welcome to The Read Down, your weekly progressive political hot take by the Stonewall Democratic Club. I'm Alex Mohajer, and tonight we'll be joined by Victor Shi. We're going to be joined by Compton City Council candidate Jace Dawson, and we're going to talk about stopping AAPI hate. We're going to talk about these shootings in Boulder, Colorado, and the movement for gun reform legislation. All of this and more tonight on The Read Down. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to The Read Down. I'm Alex Mohajer, and I am so glad to have you guys all joining us this evening. I'll be joined tonight by my beautiful, amazing co-hosts. First and foremost, Ebony Murphy-Root.
Happy Tuesday. It's just always Tuesday here at Stonewall.
It's always Tuesday. And stepping in as our guest co-host this week for Jonathan Welch is our dear friend from Stonewall. He executive produced the Stonewall Spotlight podcast, and I just found out he has a Wikipedia page that I read just for fun. But according to Wikipedia, an American new media producer, a political activist, an internet entrepreneur, and former candidate for LA City Council in the 14th District, my friend Marcus Lovingood.
Wow. Hello, Alex. Thank you so much for that marvelous introduction. My God, my Wikipedia page.
I was like, Marcus has a wiki page? Oh my God. And I was super impressed. And thanks for being here. And we adore you, Marcus. It's good to have you here. Long time overdue. So we're glad you could make it. And this week we're joined by two guests where they're coming in different orders. So first, I'd like to welcome to the program Victor Shi. He is the host of the Intergen podcast. Did I get the name of that right, Victor?
Yeah, Intergenerational
podcast. And he was the youngest Joe Biden delegate. He is here with us, been on the program before. Welcome to the program again, Victor.
Nice to be back.
How's everything going?
Not bad. In Chicago, we're seeing better weather. So things are starting to look a little bit better here in Chicago.
Praise be. Happy to hear that. And Victor is always extremely knowledgeable and just always blows my socks off. And I'll leave you to guess just how young he actually is. But that's up to you to guess. You guys, this week on The Read Down, we've got a lot going on and we've got a lot to discuss. First and foremost, it's the weekly Read Down. And we got to start off the discussion this evening with these shootings that happened in Atlanta last week, where a 21-year-old white man opened fire, shot and killed 8 people, 6 of which were Asian American women, which has prompted a real national outcry to stop AAPI violence. And this just highlights the increased violence and violent rhetoric and actual physical violence against the AAPI community and the Asian American community since the outset of the pandemic. And Victor, you actually wrote a piece called From Insults to Property Damage to Killing, After Atlanta, Asian America Fear Escalates, for USA Today, which was a fantastic piece talking about Biden's tone and how that's going to be important, his ever-changing tone, why words matter, and how those words have created a hostile environment for Asian Americans. Will you tell us a little more about your piece and what motivated you to write it?
For sure, yeah. So I'll begin by saying that I actually did not come up with the title. That was something that USA Today came up with. I'm not one to be creative with how titles are run. So I'm glad that one turned out better than my draft. But yeah, the piece really focused on, especially after the Atlanta shooting last week when 6 Asian women were killed. really try to focus on why this happened. And for me, it was because of, in large part because of Trump's words. So from the outset of the pandemic, what we saw with Donald Trump was that he used phrases like China virus, Kung flu, and these are phrases that may seem initially insignificant, but it was throughout the campaign journey, throughout his administration, throughout the last year, that he consistently used these words in order to not only scapegoat Chinese Americans, but also to get his base riled up. And then that plus the complicit and the silent nature from the rest of the Republican Party. So I mentioned Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who was asked, what his thoughts were, and then he deferred the reporter to his wife, Elaine Chao, who is Taiwanese American. There's also Kayleigh McEnany, who was who consistently used the same phrases like China virus and Kung flu, and it was just that repeated through line of not only the president but the rest of the administration, as well as Republicans on the Hill, using these phrases and not calling Trump out, that led to this increased sentiment of anti-Asian hate, anti-Asian rhetoric, anti-Asian behavior. And we saw the climax of that this week, last week, when 6 Asian women were dead. And I think just seeing that moment and seeing the outbreak of that news just really drew me back to the first reports of when Trump used those words. And I think this, while it may have shocked some, I think in hindsight it was inevitable.
Victor, your piece opens by saying that Asian Americans like me are living in fear. Would you mind if that's okay, would you feel comfortable talking about how this has affected you and the people that your family personally?
Yeah, so I'm quite fortunate that I haven't experienced too much, at least blatant discrimination, racism. I've seen some microaggressions, and just like people perpetuate the minority myth, and people think we would rather keep our heads down low than rather to make our voices heard and get politically involved. But in terms of the fear aspect, it's just hearing from so many of my friends, and also just kind of seeing for so many Asian Americans, what we're seeing right now is that anyone who looks like, my mom or my grandpa or my, grandma, we have this kind of increased kind of awareness of this increased worry that we may be also susceptible to someone pushing us off the streets, or someone hurling rhetoric at us that is demeaning, and and if worse comes to worse, after last week, it's like it can literally lead to death. And I think it's just those precipitating factors that really have made Asian Americans fearful. And it's not just what happened in Atlanta. I think it's just the increase in Asian American attacks throughout this last year. I think this group called Stop Asian Hate reported, or Stop AAPI Hate, I think reported a 150% increase in anti-Asian hate in the last year. And I talk about this in my article, but it's a lot of it is because of this rhetoric that Donald Trump has enabled, and it gives permission to his supporters to lash out against Asian Americans. And as such, I think Asian Americans have to live through that and have to endure through that. And I think now is this moment where we all have to kind of reckon with what's happened in the last year and kind of address this Asian American discrimination that we may have otherwise overlooked.
Yeah, and Marcus, you've been in politics a really, really long time, in and around for a long time. You're a vet, and we know that words matter, and from in your purview, Donald Trump's rhetoric in the last year, and the rhetoric of people in elected office, what's the impact that it has on the national discourse, and is there a direct link here?
Oh, an incredibly huge impact. I think that goes without saying. The former president of the United States, the office of the presidency used by Donald Trump to impugn various minorities is nothing new. And it's unsurprising. And of course, it was going to stoke this fire. But you see, what I'd like to bring up is that American pop culture has continually, over the years, for the longest time, contributed to this misogynistic rhetoric and overtones of the Asian community for decades. And optics really, really matter here. And this really laid the foundation for someone like Donald Trump to really stoke this fire and create a mix and a mixture of just terror that we have seen over the past year. And it's not going to stop, unfortunately. The difference here that is very, very important is that the blood is now on Joe Biden's hands. It is no longer on Donald Trump's hands. And this is going to be a very, very different situation. This is a very different administration we are seeing. We're seeing an administration that actually knows what they are doing. Hopefully that will continue. And I am hoping that someone with such a large heart that we're seeing from Joe Biden can hopefully make some big changes here. But Hollywood needs to change. Entertainment as a whole needs to change. And we really need to have a reckoning on how we are treating our fellow Asian Americans, and really going forward what this has on the public and the effect it's going to have moving forward on generations.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that. And, you know, I have a clip for you guys of Captain Jay Baker. He is the Georgia Sheriff, the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office Director of Communications in Georgia. And he handled a press conference directly after the shooting and went on to describe the shooter's motives. And we have a clip for you. Let's play that. And then I want to get Ebony's reaction to this.
And he was pretty much fed up at the end of his rope. And yesterday was a really bad day for him. And this is what he did.
And we have a part 2 as well.
So the suspect did take responsibility for the shootings. He said that early on once we began the interviews with him. He claims that these, and as the chief said, this is still early, but he does claim that it was not racially motivated. He apparently has an issue, what he considers a sex addiction, and sees these locations as something that allows him to go to these places, and it's a temptation for him that he wanted to eliminate. Like I said, it's still early on, but those were comments that he made.
You got to be kidding me with this. When it's a Middle Eastern shooter, Ebony, it's an act of terrorism, and when it's a white guy, it's the guy had a really, really bad day, and you know, he was just trying to resist temptation. What are your thoughts on Captain Jay Baker's explanation, and really your broader thoughts about how the media and all of our systems, socio-political systems, treat these kinds of incidents, these tragedies?
Mr. Baker, whose job title is Director of Communications, is bad at communicating. To center the motives of the person who killed 8 people really speaks to sort of how we center people who harm as opposed to people who've been harmed, and how we seek to decenter white men who do mass harm in this way. And really, Mr. Baker seems confused about the backlash that he is receiving, because he showed up there, he spoke, he communicated sort of poorly, but you know, why is everybody so upset? And so I mean, that was just really upsetting, demoralizing, dispiriting. When people are grieving, for him to center this killer, that was really just gross. Poor job there. Nobody else would be allowed to do their job like that, except for maybe Betsy DeVos.
Or really, there are a lot of questionable or Trump administration officials who might qualify. But Victor, do you see a shift happening? There are Stop AAPI Hate rallies that happened over the weekend from Oakland to Pittsburgh and everywhere in between. And there's been a lot of attention on this. Do you feel heartened that there's more attention being drawn to this issue? Or do you think that we're still not doing enough? And do you see a shift happening amongst not just the population, but in the administration and the way that the administration is handling this?
Yeah, I'll address maybe the administration part, just because I think today there was new news that Senator Tammy Duckworth, who represents Illinois, she said that she wouldn't confirm any nominations if they weren't Asian Americans, because the 15 main cabinet officials, none of them are Asian Americans. And I think, on the administration level, yes, I think that there should be more diversity. I think it's past time for Asian American voices to be included at the table. But I think, in part after what happened last week, there is this increased willingness for people, for the media to play this role, this larger role, and making sure that, Asian voices are included at the table. I will caveat that with maybe one point, is that this past Sunday was, I think, Chuck Todd on Chuck Todd on NBC for his Meet the Press Sunday show, as well as Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, who I guess maybe isn't that surprising, but none of their Sunday panels included any Asian Americans, and that drew a lot of frustration from people like George Takei or Representative Grace Mung. And it was just kind of this idea that, in order for us to move past what happened last week, there has to be more representation of Asian Americans across all industries, particularly ones that they're visible in. So, for example, the media, right, including more Asian Americans in the media, including their voices at the table, heightening their visibility. I think all of that is important, and all of that are responsibilities that not only people should take up for themselves, but also the media, right? So it's up to these news anchors to make sure that Asian voices are included at the table. But I do think, what we're seeing after last week in Atlanta, there has been this outcry of support for the AAPI community, but inevitably this will die down. Inevitably there will be a new story that will change the headlines. And I think it's up to all of us to kind of make sure that we call out hate when we do see it, and for us to realize that words do matter. And for, going forward, it's really on us to kind of address racism and discrimination when we do see it, so that this never happens again. And I think it's really on one level, it's a collective part that the media and all of us have to play in it, but also it's an individual level, kind of looking down, addressing our biases, and then kind of making those changes as we do see them.
Definitely. And I'll note for our viewers that last night, the Stonewall Democratic Club adopted a resolution regarding xenophobia and racism against the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, standing in support of that community. And we want to encourage anybody who sees any kinds of discrimination or violence to contact Stop AAPI Hate.org and report it, and support local Asian businesses, and talk to your friends and make sure everyone is doing okay. Those are the sort of the least things you can do. There's also GoFundMe. There's GoFundMe. We'll post the link before the end of this broadcast that is splitting donations between several community-based organizations that support AAPI, the AAPI groups. So that is that. And one other thing on this subject is there is a little bit of it's kind of not lost on us that it's kind of falling on women again to have to point out how there is now an intersectionality, an issue of intersectional violence. It's not just this hatred against Asian Americans, but 6 of these 8 people that were killed in this shooting in Georgia were women. And we have a clip from Bee Nguyen. She is a member of Congress in the Georgia State House. And here she is talking about how this is the intersectionality of these different groups that have to endure this kind of hatred.
Absolutely. And this fear has been prevalent in the community in the last year since we've seen the spike of AAPI hate crimes. That number, 150% increase of those being reported, 68% of those victims are Asian women. And I think that, it has been overlooked nationally and in our state. But, last month we started to see the rise in violent crimes against our elderly folks on the West Coast. And now that it's hitting so close to home, there is a lot of fear in the community, not just because of the hate crimes that have happened over the last year, which are a result of xenophobic messaging around the pandemic by the former president. But, there's a lot of history of Asian American violence in this country. And many of our parents or grandparents or ancestors experienced that. It was the Chinese rail workers, the incarceration of Japanese Americans, the targeting of Muslim Americans after 9/11. So this is not new, but the fact that it is increased and it hits so close to home and that the crime is so violent and brutal, I think it's all hitting us.
Why do you think the hesitancy to call it a hate crime? I know we don't know the full story here, but I think we can all acknowledge that if a different group were targeted, multiple groups were multiple groups were targeted, even as we waited for more details, people would be calling this a hate crime. Why do you think the hesitancy?
Well, I think this country has a reluctance to admit that there is very real and deep-rooted systemic racism that does result in violence. In this particular case, where the victims were Asian women, we see the intersections of racism, xenophobia, and gender-based violence. We've also seen historically where news outlets and the police frame the story around the perpetrator. And now we're hearing about the suspect in custody, and we are hearing stories about how he was religious, how he suffers from a sex addiction. It's humanizing and centering him versus humanizing and centering the victims of.
Really, really interesting. The intersection of racism, xenophobia, and misogyny. Ebony, why do Americans have such a hard time realizing that racism and misogyny are inextricably linked? And why does the job seem to always have to fall on women of color and allies to explain intersectionality to America?
Kim Crenshaw has trying to make this easy for us to understand for several decades now, but these things, when you are a person who is multiply marginalized, you have multiple identities, you live them all together all at once. You can't pick them apart and say, well, this is because I'm this or this is because I'm that. It's all of them together that make you powerful, but also make you vulnerable. The other layer of this in the conversation is whether or not some of these women were sex workers. And you know what? We don't know, but we do know that that's another group of people who are also vulnerable, right? And so we don't have ways to talk about people who are vulnerable, people who may make choices that we don't approve of we don't have the language, I think. I think Americans in general have very limited ways of talking about things that make us uncomfortable. And so we are just going to have to learn to do better about it. And we're going to have to challenge ourselves to push past these uncomfortable conversations. And we're going to have to center folks like B. Nguyen, who I think is just amazing. And also one of my favorite writers, Viet Thanh Nguyen, who has this amazing term that he talks about, narrative scarcity, right? We need more viewpoints because, as Victor mentioned, the stereotype of the model minority or the stereotype that, certain folks are going to keep their head down and you can just attack them at will and they won't fight back are what leads to this sort of violence. And we need more viewpoints in the media, more perspectives to show us that, some folks' families have been in this country for hundreds of years. Other folks just got here. Not all Asian folks have money. Having such limited language in this way doesn't allow us to talk about the range of identities and experiences that exist in this country for Asian American folks and for the rest of us. So we just have to do better. We have to keep trying, and we have to have more images in the media. Viet also has this wonderful idea that we need like mediocre movies about Asian Americans. We need mediocre movies about Black folks, not just like the superheroes and the stars, right? But just like regular folks living their life, because that in America is how we get to see people as people, right? Not as these just very miniaturized stereotypes.
Yeah, and Marcus, is there an opportunity here? I mean, last summer we saw the protests for Black Lives take really shape across the country, and a real movement was born. Black Lives Matter has been around for a long, long time, but the murder of George Floyd seemed to really shake a lot of people into allyship. Some of that has dwindled down, unfortunately, but is there an opportunity here for unity amongst marginalized groups? And do you think that that's something that would be helpful to this movement?
Marginalized groups have always had to have unity within our communities, because that's the only way we'd ever be able to find support. That's the only way we'd be able to move forward. So we have the unity in the community. What's going to have to happen is the boardrooms are going to have to change. Like Ebony was saying, the stories are going to have to change. We're going to have to start investing real dollars in the change. I mean, Alex, I don't have to tell you, but it wasn't until Lin-Manuel Miranda came upon the scene that any musical was made for anybody other than the color of white. And that is a really, really big problem. So, and we also within our communities, And this is what I want to say about the resilience of the communities of color and marginalized communities. We're taking it upon ourselves. So we have over time and time again over history to make the change ourselves as well, to push those boundaries. I mean, myself, I'm going to pitch this a little later because I'm a walking billboard, but I'm trying to remake theater from the ground up because there are stories to be told and there are other opportunities, like you said, Alex, for us to actually do things differently. I do see this, particularly for COVID, as a way for us to have a new beginning or possibly change things for the better. But it's going to take people from the top, the people with the power, to actually put those people at the table. And I'm not seeing that right now. I see a bunch of lip service and I see a bunch of sloshing around the funds. But, you know, it's going to be all of us to come together and corral around the projects that people of color, that, you know, leaders within these marginalized communities are pushing forward. And that's what's going to provide the long-term change, in my opinion, as we go forward with this.
Victor, how much of this falls on marginalized groups and how much of it falls on gatekeepers and the traditional gatekeepers who sort of determine what is seen in the media and which news anchor gets picked? You know, I think how much of the responsibility do you see falling on these various stakeholders?
Yeah, I think a tremendous amount, and this isn't, you know, just me preaching to the choir and saying that we need more representation. This is like, for example, like in news organizations, like I think the last report I've read was that Asian Americans make up nearly 6% of the make up 6% of the U.S. population. It's becoming one of the fastest growing racial demographics, but there are only 3% of Asian Americans in newsrooms across America. And I think just that fact, and you know, the higher up you go, the less Asian Americans there are, which means that the less hiring decisions are being made that include Asian Americans, the less, you know, visibility Asian Americans get at those higher level positions. And I think, you know, all of this really has to stem from people who hold positions of power. We saw that with the Me Too movement. We saw that with Black Lives Matter. And I think that, you know, it's important for us to kind of address racism and discrimination, not just on, you know, individual people can change, but so does culture. And culture, I think, changes the best when people who have positions of power really give more opportunity for Asian Americans, for people who are marginalized, vulnerable to discrimination and racism, to get those opportunities, to become more visible, and for people to actually kind of see them. Because for far too long, I think what's been the case for Asian Americans, that we've been excluded, we've been overlooked, we've been silenced. And I think it's long past time that we kind of include more Asian Americans to tell people that, you know, we exist, we're heard, we're not going to be silent, and that, you know, a lot of the stereotypes that may kind of come around because positions of power have suppressed or silenced our voices, I think it's time for them, the positions of power, to really open the gates, as you said, to include more Asian Americans and to finally kind of convey to America that we are a racial demographic that isn't afraid to speak truth to power.
Yeah, and Victor, we're running out of time with you. We know you got to go, so I want to just thank you so much for joining the program tonight. And where can people find you and support your work?
Yes, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So anywhere you guys can find me is much appreciated always.
Very good. Victor Shi, everyone. Victor, hang out as long as you like, but we know you got to dip out.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. Nice seeing you.
Thanks, Victor.